Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer here with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we have out for the state. You can also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can follow us on both Twitter and on Facebook. Starting off, we'll take a quick look at the warnings and advisories that we have out for the state. Starting on the west coast, we do have winter storm warnings all throughout the west coast, including St. Lawrence Island. And those are all in effect for snow and blowing snow, with the exception of St. Lawrence Island, that is going to have a mix of snow and freezing rain possible. All these ones on the west coast should be expiring around 6 a.m. on Thursday. And we also have a coastal flood advisory that's out until 9 a.m. on Thursday for St. Lawrence Island. The other warnings and advisories, winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories that we have out around the Brooks Range are all for snow and blowing snow, expiring various times from 6 a.m. on Thursday to around noon on Thursday for the most part. However, as we get towards the northwest coastline, snow and blowing snow for those winter storm warnings up there as well. But that is going to be out until 6 a.m. on Friday. Down in the interior in Fairbanks, we are seeing that snow come to a close, so that advisory should not be out very much longer, but that was out for snow. And then we're going to see blowing snow conditions in the Alaska Range till around 9 a.m. on Thursday. As we move out towards other areas of the state, down in Bristol Bay, we have a winter storm watch that is out. That's going to start Thursday afternoon and last until Friday afternoon. Again, you can check our website at weather.gov/Alaska to get any specifics for your area. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, you can see that we have an old frontal band here kind of streaming in some moisture towards the southeastern part of the state, but that's starting to diminish as we have a lot of high pressure building in out over the Gulf right now. And then as we look out further to the west, we have a system coming in from the south, bringing up or moving up towards the Bering Strait area, bringing a lot of cloud cover and precipitation to the areas along the west coast of the state. We have another system following right behind this one, moving into the southern part of the Bering Sea, bringing in more moisture as we're seeing a lot of warm air come up on the eastern side of those systems, bringing in a lot of rain to areas in the Bering Sea. And then behind this, we can see some of the colder air out there by some of the open cell Q that you can see behind this. And we are expecting some cold air to come in as this whole system progresses further to the east. So taking a look at what we have for the rest of today, we have our main frontal system with multiple lows stretching up through much of the Bering Sea, bringing in a lot of warmer air, rain to the central Aleutian Islands, and starting to see that mixed precipitation moving in over St. Lawrence Island area, where we are going to see some of that freezing rain. Along the west coast, we have a lot of snow and blowing snow, and that's extending out over the Brooks Range as well. And then we have some areas of blowing snow along the Arctic coastline, even though we're not seeing a whole lot of new snow fall at this time. Areas of fog expected for the southwestern part of the state, and then some isolated areas of showers, primarily in the mountains and the south central area, but getting into some of the more low-lying areas as we get into the interior. And then down in the southeastern part of the state, we can see the remnants with that trough moving through with some snow showers as we get further towards inland locations, but more rain as we get along the coastline. And as we move into tonight, high pressure really does build in, pushing off the precipitation to the south of the Panhandle area, having some fog develop around the Cook Inlet area. And we're still going to see some showers, or snow showers along the Brooks Range. Going to see some blowing snow conditions with the tighter pressure gradient up there as that low pressure system moves off to the north. Going to see those higher winds and snow falling all along the west coast down through the Yukon Delta area, seeing those blowing snow conditions out there, and still going to see a mix of snow and freezing rain out over St. Lawrence Island. As we move down into the Bering Sea, warmer air coming in, so seeing a lot of rain out there, but as we move to the western side of this system, we are going to see a lot more snow by the western Aleutian Islands. Then on Thursday, snow as we get into the western parts of the Bering Sea, but rain as we have continued influx of warmer air from the south from multiple systems coming up with a new one headed towards the Alaska Peninsula, bringing more rain to those areas. However, inland locations along the southwest and then along the west coast, all going to see snow up there, and we are going to still see some blowing snow conditions, especially earlier on Thursday before those winds start to taper down. Rest of the state dominated by high pressure, not going to see a lot of precipitation for much of the interior and through the south central as well, with areas of fog developing in the Copper River Basin. Not a lot of activity in the Panhandle. As you look into Friday, a pretty similar setup, high pressure over the Panhandle, much of the central and eastern part of the interior. Going to see some snow around south central, but with warmer air coming in, going to see some rain for Kodiak Island, extending up the southwest coast, but it's transitioning back to snow with some areas of blowing snow along the west coast of the state as the next low moves in. And then we're going to have some snow on the western side of that front for much of the central and western part of the Bering Sea. For our temperatures, lows tonight dropping down to around freezing for the Aleutian Islands, into the mid-20s for the Bristol Bay and YK Delta areas, upper 20s for the Seward Peninsula, and then in the teens along the Arctic coastline. In the interior, warmer out west in the 20s there, but dropping down to single digits with some places like Northway getting well below zero, minus 15 there. And then as we move to the south central, teens for the most part, as long when we get along the coast in the 20s. And then as for the south central or southeast part of the state, mid-20s to mid-30s, warmest to the south. Highs for Thursday afternoon in the 30s for the Panhandle area, into the 20s for most locations around the south central. Golconda only getting up to 3 degrees tomorrow. Teens for the eastern parts of the interior, into the mid-20s for the western portions, into the 20s for much of the Arctic coastline. Warmer as we get out towards the west coast, just above freezing for the Seward Peninsula, down into the YK Delta as well. Mid to upper 30s for the Bristol Bay area, right around 40 for the Alaska Peninsula, mid-30s to lower 30s as we get into the Aleutian Islands. Then Friday morning, temperatures dropping down below freezing all throughout the Aleutian Islands until we get by the Alaska Peninsula, only dropping down to around 40 degrees there. Into the mid-30s for the Bristol Bay area, mid-20s for the YK Delta area, except along the coast, a little warmer there, mid-20s for the Seward Peninsula as well, and in the teens for the most part along the Arctic coastline. Single digits for much of the central and eastern part of the interior, against some of the more eastern locations dropping down well below freezing. Glenallen now dropping down to minus 20 for Friday morning. In the mid-20s for the most part for much of the rest of south central, and then into the teens and mid-20s for the Panhandle area for Friday morning. Friday afternoon high temperatures getting up to right around 30 degrees for much of the southeast. As we get closer towards Ketchikan, a little bit warmer there, 37 degrees. Mid-20s for much of south central for highs Friday afternoon, getting into the mid-30s as we get along the North Gulf Coast, 43 for Kodiak. In the teens for much of the interior as we get further to the east, dropping down to single digits for some locations like Fort Yukon. Eastern parts of the Arctic coastline up into the mid-teens as we get to the western locations, mid-20s. Right around freezing for the Seward Peninsula, with Gamble getting up to 33 degrees. Right around 40 degrees for the YK Delta and for the Bristol Bay area. Then in the mid-30s for much of the Aleutian Islands, with St. Paul getting up to as high as 35 degrees. Shimmy away out there at 36 degrees. And we'll be back right with your aviation forecast.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For our aviation segment, we will start off with our flying weather. We do have a lot of MVFR and IFR conditions out over the Bering Sea, with a stretch just to the west of the Pribilof Islands of IFR conditions, and then up along the west coast for Seward Peninsula and up by the Brooks Range, we do have some MVFR and IFR conditions there. Well, then just off the Arctic coastline for Thursday morning. Southeast Alaska is pretty much VFR, with the exception of very far southeastern portions seeing some MVFR conditions and some isolated areas of MVFR for south central Alaska. Thursday afternoon clearing up all the way for southeast Alaska, but we will still see MVFR and IFR conditions for the Bering Sea and along the west coast and pushing out over the Brooks Range. Some isolated areas around the Kenai Peninsula as well. As we look into Friday morning, going to continue to see the MVFR and IFR conditions out along the west coast and Bering Sea, including the Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula, with still some areas in the eastern parts of Kenai Peninsula with some MVFR conditions, and some low-lying areas in the interior going to see some MVFR conditions as well. Southeast still going to be VFR. Moving into Friday afternoon, southeast still looking really nice. We will still see those isolated areas of MVFR conditions, low-lying areas in the interior, but same picture out west. We are going to see the MVFR and IFR conditions along the west coast, down through the Alaska Peninsula and for the Aleutian Islands, much of the Bering Sea as well. Changing gears for the passes, AKwx will start off IFR, improve to marginal conditions later. Adigan Pass also IFR, improving to MVFR conditions. Lake Clark and Merrillville starting off VFR, dropping down to MVFR later in the day. Rainy Pass should be VFR throughout the day, as well as Windy and Isabel passes. Mentasta will also be VFR for the day on Thursday. Mentasta starting off in VFR, improving to VFR conditions, while Portage will stay VFR throughout the day. And Chilkoot and White both VFR conditions expected for Thursday. For our surface freezing levels, we do have that riding right through the southeast part of the state along the North Gulf Coast and then out over areas of the Bering Sea. To the south of the eastern Aleutians, we do have a little bit area of a warmer air, and then to the south of the Panhandle, also some warmer air there. Looking at our icing, we do have some areas above 5,000 feet over the interior, and then between 2,000 and 5,000 feet as we get closer to the Arctic coastline. But most of our icing is going to be out west in this big swath of moisture moving from the Bering Strait area down through the Bering Sea and over the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. In the more southern locations, between 1,000 and 5,000 feet there, and between 2,000 and 7,000 feet as we get further to the north. Way out west by the western Aleutians, between 2,000 and 5,000 feet there. And for the southeastern part of the state, just to the south and east of the area, we do have between 1,000 and 5,000 feet there. For our jet stream, we'll start out west. Well to the south of our area, we do have the strongest core of the jet, 195 knots there, but as it makes it over our areas for the eastern Aleutian Islands, out of a southerly direction, 75 knots, increasing to 105 as we get further to the north towards St. Lawrence Island area. Then as it comes back around over the Arctic coastline, eastern parts of the state, about 100 knots there out of a northwesterly direction. We do have a smaller branch of the jet coming in over the Bristol Bay area, about 70 knots there. And we do have the area over the Panhandle around 100 knots out of that northwesterly direction. So we drop down to 9,000 feet. We have our high pressure out over the North Gulf Coast. Flow around that anywhere from 30 knots up to as high as 45. Weaker as we get out over Canada, 25 knots there to that northwesterly direction. Strongest core winds, though, heading in over the Bristol Bay area, 50 to 55 knots up the west coast and then out over the Arctic coastline, around 60 knots there. Flow out over the central and eastern parts of the Bering, 35 to 45 knots out of a southerly direction. But as we move on the other side of the low pressure systems there, we have northerly flow, 20 to 30 knots, increasing to as high as 45 knots out over the western Aleutians. Dropping down to 3,000 feet, we have flow around the low pressure systems out by the western Aleutians, 50 knots out of that westerly direction, dropping down to 30 to 40 knots as we move further into the Bering. As we get over the eastern part of the Bering Sea, strongest core winds, 50 to 60 knots, pushing in over that eastern Bering Sea along the west coast of the state, up around the Arctic coastline around 55 knots there, and then dropping down to around 30 knots. Flow around our high pressure system in the western part of the state, 40 to 50 knots, but dropping down as we get to the eastern sides of the low, around 20 to 25 knots there. As we look at our turbulence chart with those stronger winds, we would expect a lot of turbulence over much of the western part of the state, including the west coast of the state. Even some isolated areas of severe, and those are going to be primarily in the afternoon for these southern locations around the Alaska Peninsula and around Bristol Bay. But in the morning hours over the Seward Peninsula, that will be diminishing in the afternoon. Then we have some turbulence below 4,000 feet out over the Aleutian Islands. We will be back shortly with the marine forecast.
Dual polarization technology is a major upgrade to the current radar system. It allows forecasters a better idea of what's actually out there and can help keep you safe.
Current radar technology transmits and receives information in the horizontal direction, which is very limited. Dual polarization technology, in addition to the horizontal, transmits and receives vertical energy, which allows forecasters to get information about the size, shape, and phase of the precipitation. We can use that information to better determine the precipitation type to expect at your given location.
There you have it. This new technology is currently being installed in radars across the country and is already being used by National Weather Service forecasters to produce better, more accurate forecasts. Learn more here and follow us. Want to know about the future of weather radar? Well, the National Severe Storms Lab has it here with its new phased array radar. Let's check it out.
It's a non-moving radar. It has 4 faces of the antenna, each pointing in different directions. One of the big advantages is that we're seeing so far, it can sample the area around the radar in less than a minute, maybe even a half a minute. And this is 5-6 times faster than what they can do today.
NSSL is leading the development of future weather radar with this project. Learn more here and follow us. The Storm Prediction Center is one of the NOAA weather partners. They are located in the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. Greg Carbon gives us a glimpse into what the SPC does.
Our mission is to analyze and forecast severe thunderstorms and the potential for tornadoes, large hail, and damaging winds from those thunderstorms across the lower 48 states, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. One of the primary missions of the Storm Prediction Center is the issuance of severe thunderstorm and tornado watches across the country when conditions appear to be coming together to support the development of severe thunderstorms and tornadoes.
The world-class meteorologists in the Storm Prediction Center specialize in severe weather and keeping you safe. Learn more here and follow us.
The National Severe Storms Lab is working on increasing the lead time for severe weather warnings. The national average for tornado warnings is currently 13 minutes, but more notice would be helpful, especially for those in charge of moving large groups to shelter. Warn on Forecast will help forecasters issue hazardous weather warnings earlier. The project will give them more info about the chances of strong winds, large hail, and even tornadoes.
Currently, warnings are created by forecasters looking at the atmosphere outside, understanding its volatility, and then comparing that to how they see the Doppler radar presenting what's going on inside thunderstorms. Warn on Forecast is an idea where we're going to take the massive amounts of satellite, radar, and surface data and stick them all into a very high resolution prediction model. And then by producing new forecasts every 15 or 20 minutes, the forecasters hopefully will be able to use that model to produce warnings that extend out to an hour.
Before the National Weather Service can use this tool, it must be developed and tested. One big challenge will be deciding how to get the model predictions to the forecasters.
I'm going to keep this one very low. I'm just adjusting the track.
These hazardous weather prediction models are going to produce a huge amount of output. And this fire hose of data is just too much for forecasters to handle in real time quickly. So in order to help deal with that, NSSL has developed a related project called Facets. And Facets is the methodology which will enable forecasters to focus very quickly on the most important threats.
Once Warn on Forecast and Facets are proven to be reliable and effective, then forecasters will be better able to inform you of threats nearby. Learn more here and follow us.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is located at the National Weather Center in Norman, Oklahoma. It is used for experiments that will allow forecasters to learn and apply new technologies.
The Hazardous Weather Test Bed is a really unique space throughout all of NOAA. And this is where the researchers and the operational folks come together in a common space to solve operational problems and to test new research tools that the research community is working on. The goal is to accelerate the transfer from research to operations of the newest tools and techniques.
People come from around the world to collaborate on this unique project.
We can bring together not only NOAA people, but also university people, faculty, researchers, private sector meteorologists, folks working in other countries in meteorology, forecasters, can all come together and focus on what the problem of the day is with the forecasters.
Each spring, several experiments occur in the hazardous weather test bed. Learn more here and follow us.
What are you looking at? And what are you ignoring? Did you notice the NOAA logo in the corner? Forecasters have a lot of information in front of them too. Every second counts during severe weather, and decisions about where to focus are constantly being made. This could be even more challenging in the future. Phased array radar will produce 4 to 6 times more information than what we have now, which brings us to the question researchers are hoping to answer. Will more radar information affect forecasters' decisions?
From our past experiments, we've learned a lot about how forecasters think during the warning decision process, but we've also learned that those thought processes are very complex, and for that reason, we need a better way to be able to track forecasters' cognitive activity.
Inbounds and possibly golf ball sized hail.
An eye tracker is a piece of technology that is used to determine in real time where someone's eye gaze is located. And these eye trackers are typically video-based, which means a camera sits below a computer monitor, and with infrared light and vector analysis, we can determine where a person is looking and how their eyes are moving.
Eye tracking is already being used in the medical field and air traffic control. Using similar research methods, NSSL is discovering the benefit for weather forecasting too. Phased array radar will give forecasters a lot more to think about. Understanding their decision-making process will help researchers develop even more user-friendly tools. So what's the benefit for you? Even better weather warnings. To learn more, check us out online and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back to the Marine Forecast. We'll start off with a quick look at the ice edge. Most of the ice along the west coast is seeing a lot of southerly flow, so that means a lot of warm air coming up from the south. So we are expecting a lot of these areas to start to melt and have the thicker ice push further to the north. Any area south of Nunavik Island along the coast, whether it be Kuskokwim Bay or Bristol Bay, we're expecting that to melt out in the next couple days with that southerly flow. However, it's a little bit colder over the Cook Inlet area, so expecting ice to continue to grow for Cook Inlet. Taking a look at the main part of the marine forecast, now we'll start off with southeast Alaska for Thursday. In the inside waters up north, we have northerly flow around 35 knots, diminishing as we get further to the south, around 15 knots there. Easterly flow out over much of the Gulf, 15 to 20 knots with seas as high as 10 feet. Then on Friday, flow becoming more southeasterly, 25 to 30 knots with seas getting as high as 18 feet up further to the north. Inside waters, mostly an easterly component to the direction, a little bit more northerly as we get further to the north, around 20 knots there. As we look into Thursday for the south central locations, we have easterly flow throughout much of the Gulf area. Weakest to the east, 20 knots there, getting up to as high as 40 knots as we get closer towards the Barren Islands, with Prince William Sound in there at 15 knots. In the Cook Inlet area, 25 to 30 knots northeasterly direction. Highest seas west of the Barrens around 12 feet on Thursday. However, on Friday, winds are going to pick up, especially around the Barren Islands. Storm force winds there, 55 knots out of the east. Highest seas now on the eastern side of the Barren Islands, up to as high as 27 feet. For the Cook Inlet area, 25 to 35 knots out of a northeasterly direction. And north parts of the Gulf, 40 to 45 knots also out of that easterly direction. Prince William Sound a little bit weaker there, 25 knots and only 6 feet for seas. So look along the Alaska Peninsula near Kodiak Island, easterly flow there. On the Pacific side of the area, we are seeing storm force winds 50 to 55 knots, seas as high as 23 feet. In the Bering side, around 45 knots there, seas around 12 feet. Then on Friday, we're seeing southeasterly flow, weakest to the west, 30 knots there, picking up to as high as 45 knots as we get closer towards Kodiak Island. And we will see some storm force winds through the Bristol Bay area, or easterly direction around 50 knots there. Weaker as we get further to the west, only around 30 knots. So look at Thursday for the Aleutian Islands, primarily a westerly component to the flow for the westerly winds, 35 to 45 knots there, around 25 feet for seas. As we move to the east, winds becoming more southerly, 35 to 40 knots. Then on Friday, switching up to all become much more westerly or northwesterly, 35 to 40 knots, with seas getting up to as high as 26 feet. And as you move off to the west, winds diminishing, westerly component 25 knots out there. Along the west coast of the state, we're seeing southeasterly flow up by the Bering Strait around 30 knots, getting up to as high as 45 knots near Nunavik Island. Then on Friday, flow becoming a little bit more north to westerly. You can see these winds way out here becoming more northerly, 35 knots by the Pribilof Islands, 25 knots, and then up along the west coast, storm force winds south of Nunavik Island, southeasterly flow around 55 knots there. Along the Arctic coastline, we do have southerly flow, 40 knots for wind speeds, diminishing as we move to the east, getting down to as low as 20 knots near Kaktovik. Then on Friday, flow becoming more easterly, 20 knots out over the Arctic coastline, picking up as we get down by the Kotzebue Sound area, Bering Strait, east to southeast directions, 35 to 40 knots there. Quick recap for the state. We do have a series of lows moving up through the Bering Sea overnight. We do expect one of the lows to be near the eastern Aleutian Islands, bringing up a lot of warm air to bring some rain to the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, and a chance of freezing rain for St. Lawrence Island, where we do have a winter storm warning out for the area out until around 6 a.m. on Thursday. We also have a coastal flood advisory out for the island. That's going to be valid until 9 a.m. on Thursday. All along the west coast from the Norton Sound area further to the north up and through the Brooks Range, we do have a lot of snow and blowing snow, so we do have some winter storm warnings and winter weather advisories out for that snow and blowing snow in those locations, many of which are out until around either 6 a.m. or noon on Thursday. However, up along the northwest coastline, out until 9 a.m. on Thursday for snow and blowing snow winter storm warning. Down over the western Aleutians, we have a low out there, colder temperatures bringing us some snow. High pressure dominating much of the southeastern part of the state, just leaving some areas of fog around Cook Inlet, but not a lot of precip for the Panhandle. Most of that's pushed off to the south and east. On Thursday, pretty similar situation. High pressure dominating the Panhandle, south central, and much of the interior, but we are still going to see that snow and blowing snow all along the west coast from Norton Sound further to the north, and some areas of blowing snow along the Arctic coastline. Warm air coming in, bringing some rain to the Alaska Peninsula and central Aleutian Islands. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.